Hey guys, Zach here from Darter Design. We're going to be going through how to put together one of our Hornet 220 frame kits. So follow along if you're looking forward to building one of these kits. So to start out, let's go over with the packaging. So when you purchase a kit, it'll come in this tagged poly bag with some specs on the back in case you were to pick it up at a shop. But for the most part, you can see here that we've got all the carbon, the parts, and also like battery pad and other types of plastic parts in here. In addition to just the kit, you're also going to need some handy dandy tools. So for example, to complete this kit, you're going to need a 2.5mm hex wrench, a 1.5mm hex wrench, and a 50 thousandths hex wrench. In addition, you're going to need a 4mm hex wrench for the Chainring bolt that's on the bottom of the frame. And then if any of you guys like using Loctite, I highly suggest try picking up a bottle of this 222 MS. This is for micro screws. So this is Loctite that's not as strong as blue Loctite. So if you Loctite these smaller M2 screws in the frame, and I'll show you exactly where I recommend it or don't recommend it, you won't actually break any of the hardware when you try and get it out. So I highly suggest for M2s and M3s to pick up a bottle of this 222 MS from Loctite. So let's take our tools, put them off to the side for reasons we don't need them right now. And also I forgot to mention, also a little parts tray. I like these. They come from actual Tasty Cakes. So if you have any of these small parts trays lying around or any other small little thing to dump the bag of parts in, I highly suggest that as well. So let's get into building this. Alright, so let's put the example frame off to the side and let's go ahead and open this up. So just go ahead, remove the paper tag. If you want, there's also a QR code on the back for you to get access to the other videos as well as the product page or replacement parts if you need them for quick and easy access. So let's go ahead, get rid of that staple. And then first things first, I'm going to pull out, show you the specs on the back, gives you all the weights, sizes, and whatnot, and recommendations for the frame. But also, if you go and open it up, you see we have a full instruction manual here in case you don't have the videos available to you. Showing a nice exploded view and a label of all the parts, the contents you should have in your kit, and once again, the same QR code that will get you to the product webpage so that you can get replacement parts, see other videos, and whatnot. I'm going to place those over to the side for now. Let's get all these carbon parts. Let's get the arms. We got the battery pad. We got the camera cage. We got all of our hardware. Top plate, mid plate, and bottom plate. As I mentioned before, we got all the parts. I'm going to take those, dump those into my parts tray, and then take these bags and put them off to the side. So when I'm putting this frame together, I always highly suggest starting out with the middle plate. This already has the press nuts in here for the M3 screws that hold the arms in, but the thing is you have to start with this part first to make things easier, as the hardware that's included is also the hardware for the stack. So there will be 4 M2 by 20 flathead screws in the hardware that are meant for mounting your middle stack. So we're going to go through, see if we can find these. Should get a bigger parts tray. There we go. So we got these 4, and you're also going to try and hunt down 4 M2 nuts. These will be used to capture it on the other side. And 4, there we go. So we've got our 4 M2 by 20 flathead screws and our 4 M2 nuts. On the one side of the mid plate, you'll see these countersunk screws. They're spacing for either 16 by 16 flight controllers and stacks or 20 by 20 flight controllers and stacks. Now, as a reminder, this kit is specifically designed around the Flywoo 6-in-1 ESC with the F4 or F7 flight controller combo. So this is a 16 by 16 package. This is what I use kind of exclusively on my builds just because it's nice, tiny, and neat. So I highly suggest picking one of those. I highly suggest the F411 combo for freestyle only because you're not going to be using GPS, but if you have to use GPS and you need more UARTs, I highly suggest the F741 version of this combo to put into your build. So as such, the inner holes here are the 16 by 16 mount, and you're going to put the M2 through on the countersunk side and then take the M2 nut and run that all the way down. So this is where the 50 thousandths hex driver comes into play. You want to get the nut to be in this machine slot here because this will actually engage the nut. And then you can tighten it up. Now this is one of the areas where I would suggest using Loctite. So we're going to quick loosen that up a smidge. And then I'm going to take the 222 MS. There is also a 222, which is for kind of like number 12s and also number 10 screws, as well as 1/4 inch size hardware. So that's kind of a little bit of overkill, so that's why I highly suggest the MS for the M2 and M3 size screws. So put a little dab on there. Once again, back it down, get it so that it's parallel to the slot so that it sits right down on in there, and then you can go ahead, tighten it down, and you'll see you'll be able to tighten it all the way because it's captured in the slot. So that's 1 out of 4. I'm gonna put the other one in, put a tiny drop of Loctite. So basically this Loctite will help when you're putting in your flight stacks or doing any repairs from this loosening up. And these can also be a smidge fiddly. Also, if you have a deep enough nut driver, you can also pull out a 4mm nut driver to help get these the initial way home. So there's 2. Put in the next one. Just a little bit. You don't need too much. Like for example, that might actually be a little too much Loctite. So if you do have too much Loctite, the easy thing you can do is get a paper towel. Alright, got our paper towel and just dab it off a little bit. The remaining that's left on there should be more than enough. And then finally the last one. And I would say, for example, that is the best amount to put on there. So now I've got all 4 of the flathead cap screws tightened down, nice and flush, so they won't interfere, because this is the side of the plate where the arms actually will attach to. So with that in mind, the next step I would say is putting the arms on. This is when I would put those on. To do that, we need to start with putting on the bottom plate. So between the middle and bottom plate is where the arms will sit and also be captured by the Chainring bolt. So there are these 2 pieces that look kind of like V's with some through holes in them. These are spacers. These will go on the front and in the rear, and they will space off the bottom plate, making a nice space for the arms to slide in. This will keep everything together when you go and replace arms. So for example, if you had to remove and replace all arms, you still have everything together and nothing's coming apart and all dangling with all the wires attached to it. So in order to put these in, there's going to be four total M2 by 14s. These are the longer socket head cap screws. So we've got our longer M2 by 14 socket head cap screws. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the bottom plate, put those through these two holes in the front and in the rear. And starting with just the front only, we're going to take these, and these V's are going to go through these holes. Now, these holes are pretty much a match fit with the hardware, so depending on tolerances, they either will slide over with a little bit of resistance, or what you can do is you can take your 1.5 millimeter socket wrench and tighten them down. Now, they actually won't bite into the plastic, so don't worry if they free spin after you get them put on there. So now we'll come to the rear. Get these two through there. Get this put on. And start away. See, now this one's being a little bit more difficult, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and screw it down. It does bite enough that it'll screw it down, but you won't be able to compress it. And that's not an issue, as you'll see in a little bit when we tie this thing together, how it stays together. So there we go, we've got these two flats. Now, the reasoning behind these, other than the spacing, is they also kind of create a channel for some wires, and I'll show you later on in the build how that helps, because you can actually run some wires, whether it be for an antenna or other types of model finder or buzzer or whatnot, through these runs. But you've got the bottom plate here with the spacers, and now you've got your mid plate here with the stack hardware, and those two will come together like this. Press nuts will be on the top for the arms, and the V's will be pointing inwards, and the bottom plate faces forwards like this. So for example, this is the bottom of the frame, and this is the middle part of the frame. And this is forward, and that's rear. So now what we can do to kind of keep this together is you can take one of the M2 by 20 aluminum standoffs, and you can use it and screw it down onto one of those M2 by 14 socket head screws. This will help basically capture it, and if you want, you can use Loctite during this step, or you can omit that. Cool, and there we go. See, this is captured and it's all together, even though the arms aren't attached. And then before we can put the arms in, we actually have to put the Chainring nut and bolt in. So go ahead and grab that from your parts and unscrew it. And the part that you actually want to put in the mid plate here is the actual nut. So this will be the kind of barrel shaped with the internal threads. You want to go and put that through down the middle here. Should slide right in. And for example, when you go and tighten this down, once you have the arms installed, if you do find that it's spinning, you can use a little bit of super glue to glue the flange in. So far I haven't had an issue with that, but if that does tend to happen, go ahead and just use a little bit of super glue. This is meant to kind of stay in there and be almost flush to get out of the way of the electronics. So it doesn't hurt to do that. But now that we have that in there, we can use that as kind of a backer to put the arms in. Now, the arms are directional in the sense of top to bottom, so you just want to make sure you put them in the right way. The bottom is the one that has this little pocket cut out. This is there so that you can use standard hardware to mount your motors. So basically you have a 2mm thick portion right here for using either M2x4 or M2x5 or M2x6, depending on how thick the base of your motor mount is. That way you can use these supplied screws that come with your motor, and you don't have to get any obscenely long like M2x7 or M2x8 screws that are kind of difficult to come by. So you want to make sure that that's pointing down. Take the arm, slide it in, and you'll see it kind of butts up and rotates about the Chainring nut. And then what we can do to hold it in place is you can take the M3x10. It's the only M3 socket head screw in the kit. And again, this is from the bottom, looking at the bottom with the pocket on the bottom. Take the screw, put her through, and then grab your 2.5mm hex wrench and go ahead and get that lightly tight. You don't need to tighten it down just yet. Usually we do that at the end. So now you can go through and do that for the rest of the arms. And what you'll see is that with the cut on the arm here, you'll actually be able to nestle in the arms all by themselves. This is one of the attributes of the way this is cut, based off of the inspiration from Dave C's Gate Hunter frame. All these kind of lock in by just screwing it down. This is just one way that I had to make sure that the frame stayed nice and tight, was to make sure that the tolerances were pretty close. So as you saw, the screw went right in. There was no issues, no binding. It wasn't grinding away on any of the carbon. And again, kind of put it in, and then I rotate it into place. That's kind of how I put these arms in. Put in number 4. Put in number 5, and also on the front and the rear arms, you can actually use the spacer on the back as kind of an abutment to tighten it down. And then lastly, the final arm. I had to give that one just a little bit of a nudge to kind of seat it so that the screw would start. But it's going the rest of the way just fine. Cool, so now all the arms are in, and you'll actually see, even though those are kind of lightly tight, there's no play in these arms. And to add to that, we're also going to use this as a clamp. So simply take the Chainring bolt, place it in there, get it started by hand, and then you can pull in your 4mm hex wrench and lightly tighten that down. Now I usually start out by lightly tightening it, and if you were to be mounting these permanently, then you can go through and tighten all of the M3 screws in a roundhouse fashion, Or you can kind of do a star pattern, kind of like changing out your car tire. And then I usually follow that up by tightening down on the Chainring bolt. And then just doing one last check, making sure that the Chainring bolt didn't seat anything further, creating more slop. So these are pretty darn tight. So I can't turn these anymore. And there you go, you have your frame with all the arms, bottom and mid plate. Alright, so next is putting on the camera cage. And the camera cage is these two plastic pieces here to protect the lens of whatever FPV camera you have in the front of the kit. Now there's a left and a right. You can tell which side is which based off of the counterbore. The counterbore goes on the outside and on the bottom. So you can see here, bottom right and bottom left. Another neat feature of these is we installed heat set inserts, so you don't have to worry about stripping out the plastic and these coming loose. So to start out putting this in, there is a standoff that goes between these two. You can kind of see a little bit of the recess that this sits in. And to put that on, you're going to grab the M2x5 socket-head cap screws and your 1.5 hex drive. I'm going to take the screw, put it through on the counterboard side, and then basically snug up with the standoff on the other side. And you'll see, nice and flush with the socket head, and we do that for the other side. So take the M2x5 socket head cap screw, put it through on the counterbore, and then tighten up onto the standoff. Now don't tighten these down just yet, but basically just get them a little tight so that we can twist them into position. So the standoff goes on the base, and what we're going to be doing is taking that and attaching it on the bottom. So to do this, we're going to be using, again, more M2x5 socket head cap screws. These are the smaller of the socket head cap screws in the kit. Using this again, making sure that the standoff is on the bottom side. Put them through the bottom plate and screw them down into those heat sets. Now the beauty of this is you can tighten these down fairly tight and not worry about stripping it out. But of course you don't want to go Hercules or the Hulk on these either. And you can go ahead and tighten these down to where you're comfortable. And now we have the camera cage. So that almost gets us complete here. The last step before, I would say, putting in your electronics and making other decisions and starting to wire this thing up is to put on the rear standoffs. So the rear standoffs, once again, M2x20 standoffs, will be attached on the back with, once again, M2x5 socket head cap screws. So using the 1.5mm hex drive, we're going to come to these two screws in the rear. And tighten it down right in that spot. Once again, feel free to use Loctite if you want on these standoffs. And you can go ahead and tighten these down to where you're comfortable. So for the most part then, here you go. You can start wiring up everything. You can mount your camera to the side here. We've supplied M2x5s for doing so, and you can choose whether it be front or rear. But then let's say you had everything wired up. Last thing is putting on the battery pad on the top plate. So once again, top plate is also directional versus top versus bottom. Top is going to have these countersinks for the screws up here. So the battery pad will sit on there just like this and still give you access to these 4 M2x5 flathead cap screws. So simply just peel off the backer. This is self-adhesive. And I would suggest by starting with lining up over these two holes here, and then kind of massaging it in place. And once it's in place, giving it a nice little press. So then, once everything's all said and done, you'd simply take this and take 8 M2x5 flathead cap screws and screw them down. So before I do that though, we're going to go over kind of some mounting options of different electronics and kind of what I've designed into the frame to do what in regards to certain electronics. So let's go ahead and kind of clean this up just a smidge. Done with the Loctite for now. All right, so with the different options that you have, it mostly comes down to the plastic parts that are included in the kit. We have a T antenna mount with these two pieces. We also have a dipole mount with this, depending if you're using the TBS Immortal Nano that comes with the small little whip antenna, or we also have freestyle video transponder mount or an SMA style mount, and I'll show you how those all go in. Lastly, there's also a 16x16 both FreeSky RXSR mount or a TBS Nano mount. Let me show you what each one does. So, for example, I've got an example build here that uses the freestyle mount, freestyle video transponder mount on the back. So that uses this piece right here and is for your either Rush or HDLRC style tube transmitters. So what you can do is over the rear standoffs, you can slide this over and down on these two standoffs, and you can put your video transponder tube through here. Now for this, there is a screw that you can use to actually capture the tube in there, so you don't have to worry about it coming off. It kind of pinches on there. So for those, there's an M2x6 button head. It's the only button head that's in the kit. There's two of them because the SMA also uses that same feature. So for example, if you wanted to do that, you'd stick your tube antenna through and then take the M2x6 and screw it down in. Now these might need a little bit of a start as they're meant to bite into the plastic. So I'm going to kind of clean this out with a 1.5mm drill bit to get it started. Get a little bit of a press to get it bite. Give it a little bit more. Take a little bit of pressure to get started, but once you get her started, it's fairly tight, and because it's plastic, you won't have to worry about it backing out. So just to show you guys, I'm going to bottom it out. So of course I wouldn't suggest having it get pinched, but hopefully you guys can see it. The screw comes down into the hole here to kind of pinch the tube of the video transmitter antenna and keep it in there. So that's one of the options, and that's for basically doing what I did here with my dedicated freestyle build. As you can see, the head just clears the props, and you can see because these Rush antennas come with a little bit of a flexible tube, you almost can't even hit it. You'd have to be running into something going backwards really hard or something for this to actually hit. So that's why I like mounting this here, because it's kind of out of the way. It's not going to get clipped by any other structures or whatnot. You really have to kind of be grooving and have something come through and hit it in order to get it to really run into the prop. So on the lines of video transmitters, we also have this part here, which can not only hold radio antennas, like the whip antennas, kind of like your Diversity 2.4, or it can also hold an SMA. So for example, if any of your video transmitters come with a SMA pigtail like this, what you can do is you can actually slide this in from the back and then tighten it down with your lock nut and washer and nut that came with that pigtail, and then screw your antenna on top like so. So I've got another example build with this already on there. And you can see here are the antenna tubes for the Free Sky transmitter and receiver, and then also for the SMA video transmitter antenna. And also, once again, this uses the button head screw to put that on there. So finding the last remaining button head cap screw, getting the 50 thou hex driver. Once you get your pigtail in there and tightened down, you can then go ahead and screw this in. And this will basically allow you to capture on that flat. Now you don't want to over tighten. And there. So I just added security and anti-rotation. So there's 3 holes here down on the bottom. And what you'll see is there's 3 holes here on the top. So to put this on, you'll throw your pigtail through here. You can put this on before putting the pigtail in. The pigtail will come out either way. And you want to grab more of the M2x5 socket head cap screws to do so. So I always like to start with the one through the middle. Now again, lightly tighten. This is plastic, so you can potentially strip it out if you go too tight. Take the other one. Lightly tighten it down. And then the last remaining hole. Tighten that down. So as you see, kind of sits at a slant back. You can fit an 80 millimeter battery just about, depending on your camera angle, if you have this part on. If you do not use an SMA or use these radio RX receiver antenna holders, you could potentially get an even longer battery on there as well. So, and then just to show you guys, you can remove the SMA holder while it's still attached. So if you back out the M2x6, it'll slide right out. Now a note on the antenna tubes. For example here, these are the forever tubes that you can get from either Pyrodrone or Race Day Quads or 3D Print Spider. These radio tubes, anything up to 3.2 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch diameter can be used. So a lot of RC car antenna tubes as well made out of ABS will work, but I highly suggest the forever tubes. That's what I used here. And that is also what I used here. Speaking of which, if you also want to set up your frame to have this kind of style, whether it be the Crossfire Nano that comes with that lightweight antenna, if you wanted to put some antenna tubes, add some color. There's also this option which will slide over the standoffs as well. And what happens here is the wires will feed in here and then come out. So for example, if you did have a whip antenna, you'd feed these through and they would come right out. So in addition, because I pulled this out, in the kit were the 16x16 receiver mounts. You can either have a FreeSky one, where your FreeSky board will actually kind of clip in like this, and you still have access to the bind button when it's installed. And for an example, here is the Crossfire version. Now the Crossfire version just simply has a cutout on this side to allow passage of the micro UFL, and once again, your bind button is there as well. Last is for mounting an Immortal T. We've got this. This can actually be used for not only an Immortal T, but also some other 900 megahertz kind of dipole antennas. You'll see that there's kind of a smaller hole and then there's a larger hole. What these are meant to do, they are meant for going over the standoffs, depending on how you want to do it, whether or not you want the antenna coming out here or coming out here. But before doing so, what you can do is on the larger hole, these are meant for sliding over the antenna and then clipping over these little tiny barbed features, I'll call them, on the Immortal T antenna. So they go, clip over, and then you can either press them down and put them wherever you want, height-wise, on the standoffs, and then you can mount them either in towards here. You can then also mount them this way or that way, or however you want. It gives you the freedom to do that with the T-style antenna. So let's go over some other non-accessory type mounting features that are going on in this frame. So for example, I mentioned before that there's these channels on the bottom. What these are really good for are either mounting a model finder. I ran the wires through this little channel here. Or you can take, for example, if you have an Immortal T, you can put the wires through and you can then take these off. You can then also zip tie around some of these cutouts, and this provides kind of a nice flow for cables. Same thing, for example, if you wanted to do the popular front mount as well in the front here for an Immortal T. Once again, you can kind of put the wire right through the channel. It comes right up through into this cutout, either front or rear, and then you can run it wherever you want. So just for some examples, the top frame has 3 holes in it for battery straps like this. So you have 3 slots for kind of weaving through battery straps if you want. This is what I did on this build, which is pretty similar to what I did on this as well. And depending on the length of the battery, you can either have them close by, or just for example, you could also weave them, put them here so that you could put the strap over this side. As for camera mounting, you can mount your camera either forward or aft. There's 3 mounting options. Hopefully you guys can see that. So there's rear, middle, and front. For example, smaller cameras, like here I have the Caddx Radix. I have it all mounted all the way forward. Or for on HD builds, like so, you can mount it backwards to kind of give room for some of the longer lenses. So also at this point, just to show you guys, one of the reasons I highly suggest this stack, because these guys then just slip over onto your grommets. Actually push that one through. But you can see, nice clearance. You got plenty of room to pass. For example, with the hybrid, I had their coax cables can come to the rear to a DVR unit or whatnot. So make sure I can get this off in one piece. Fix that later. So presuming you have everything then in how you want it, just simply button this up. We'll just take our 50 thousandths, we'll take the rest of the flathead hardware and simply screw it down. So on the rears here, I did design it well enough so that you still have access to these rear screws if you have the SMA style installed. So you can see I still can easily from the top get to the standoffs and put the screws in and out to get access if I have to make repairs or swap out parts or whatnot. All right. And there you guys have it. That's how you put together the Hornet 220. And also my recommendations for how to go about either threading out the wire or setting up any other types of accessories that you have in this frame. So, and also for those of you looking for custom colors, you can also request custom colors if you want. I put in some aluminum hardware here, changed out the color of the Chainring bolt, and also you can change out the color of the standoffs, just so if you wanted to personalize your vehicle. Once again, kind of an example, red Chainring, red standoffs. You can actually make it look pretty darn decent. So, hope you guys enjoyed, and be sure to like and subscribe, as we're going to be having a lot of other products be coming out and other more build videos.